From the start of recorded history, we have created and observed folklore and mythology. From leprechauns to Wendigo, there are countless stories of mythological creatures, a lot of which are supernatural or demonic in nature. Welcome to Encounters with Folklore, a new series where we will be discussing the origin of these stories, interesting facts about them, and most importantly, telling 3 unique true encounters with the demons of old. Tonight, we're diving deep into one of the scariest legends from Native American folklore. Even though simply saying the name of this beast is forbidden, the name has almost become a household one, the Skinwalker. This legend, if you can even call it that, is one of the most intense and real pieces of Native American folklore, or any folklore, as there are countless internet stories based on the encounters with this demon. Tonight, we're going to uncover the history behind the Skinwalker, of course, as well as telling 3 true encounters with these demonic beings. The origin story comes from Native Americans. There are many Western Native American tribes known to share connections and stories about these beasts, but the vast majority of them are from the Navajo tribes. They refer to them as shapeshifters because of their grotesque ability to transform into other creatures, animals, and humans. They have a phrase they say in Navajo. The translation means, with it, he goes on all fours. Their transformations have been characterized by their unsettling appearance, akin to the uncanny valley. These monsters may be able to change their form, but there's always a tell. Their eyes, their legs, their body, something about the animal or person they take form of seems off. A lot of accounts talk about the monster walking or running on its hind legs, and many of the stories describe these beings as coyote-like or wolf-like in appearance. The Skinwalker is known to be a former healer, a Native American witch doctor, if you will. But not just any healer or doctor becomes a Skinwalker. Only those who are corrupted by their power, spoken to by demons, almost possessed by the thought of becoming one themselves, they choose to leave this life behind for the life of a monster. However, there are actually 2 known ways to become one of these things. The second way is a ritual, a passage of rite of some sort into becoming this demon. It is called the Witchery Way. To initiate this ritual, it involves grave robbing and necrophilia, a truly disgusting act. The final and most known step of the ritual is to murder a loved one, especially a sibling. There are likely many more complexities to this ritual, but for this eternal demonic power, I suppose some will do anything. People say Skinwalkers are supremely powerful beings, being near impossible to kill. From the folklore, people say the only way you may have a chance is if you coat a bullet, knife, or arrow in white ash. Like a vampire and the silver bullet, only this may not even be effective. Although there are so many stories of encounters with these demons, such little is actually known about skinwalkers. This is due to the Navajo tribes being reluctant to talk about this with outsiders. In fact, they rarely even talk about it within their own tribes. Skinwalkers are mostly seen at night and in areas where wild animals live, places like the forest and desert. They are said to be seen in the Navajo Nation, which is located in the four corners of Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. There's been a notable amount of stories that come from the famous Skinwalker Ranch that is located in the Uinta Basin in Utah. The land that the ranch stands on used to be inhabited by the Ute tribe. People say that when the Ute and Navajo tribes were hostile towards each other, the Navajo would unleash these skinwalkers on their enemies. They even turned some of them into these demons. To this day, it is these very same skinwalkers that are said to be there, stalking the land and any unsuspecting person who happens to be around. Since we're already sharing our most traumatic experiences, I might as well. I, 34 male, grew up on a Navajo reservation in northern Arizona that was surrounded by rich culture and traditions. My family was well respected, largely due to my Aunt Lita. She was our tribe's medicine woman, revered for her knowledge of ancient practices, her healing touch, and her deep connection with the spiritual realm. Aunt Lita was always a mysterious figure to me. She had a way about her that was both comforting and intimidating. Her rituals and chants seemed to have real power, and people from other towns would even visit just to see her. As I grew older, I began to notice my lovely aunt changing. She became more reclusive. I remember one night specifically where we were all in a panic looking for her as she suddenly went missing. We had found her miles away, naked in the middle of the desert. Her feet were blistered and her eyes were bloodshot. In her hands, she was holding an odd statue that only my dad knew the meaning of. Honestly, since I was only about 13 at the time, it really scared me, and I still think about her face from that night. She was dehydrated to the point of almost dying, but all she could say was, the elders of our tribe whispered among themselves, wary of the path that she was treading. They spoke of how the power of the ancient demon could corrupt even the most purest of souls. Just after my 15th birthday, Aunt Lita gathered our family in her old, dimly lit hogan. The air was thick with incense, and the flickering candles cast eerie shadows on the walls. She spoke of visions she'd been having, visions of great power and great darkness. She believed she had been chosen for something greater, something beyond healing. That night, as we left the hogan, my father pulled me aside and warned me to stay away from her. She's treading on dangerous ground, he said. I asked my dad why he and the rest of the tribe didn't stop her, and he simply said, "We can't. She's already far beyond our power." Aunt Lita's behavior grew increasingly erratic. Animals around the reservation began disappearing, and whispers of witchcraft spread like wildfire. We heard rumors of her performing forbidden rituals, seeking power from darker spirits. One night, a chill ran down my spine as I heard a blood-curdling scream echo through the canyons. It was followed by an unnatural silence, almost as if the wildlife had disappeared. The next day, we found our neighbors' livestock brutally slaughtered, their bodies twisted in ways that defied nature. The elders convened a council and declared that a skinwalker was among us, a witch doctor who had become corrupt and now possessed the ability to transform into any animal or being that they desired. Though they didn't say it outright, I knew they suspected Aunt Lita. My heart sank and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I felt betrayed that my aunt, who had helped heal so many of us, had used this power for evil. The village grew fearful of the demon as it terrorized us. One stormy night, the beast had followed a car into the reservation. It had caused the driver to wreck, and unfortunately, the crash had taken his life. This was the last straw for the elders. They decided to take action. In the past, during a war between the Navajo and another tribe, the Navajo had decided to summon skinwalkers to curse and annihilate their enemies. These skinwalkers still stalk this area to this day, and thus our tribe deemed the land forbidden. The elders had came to a consensus. Since skinwalkers were so powerful, it was best not to challenge Lita. Instead, they decided to lure her to this forbidden land in which the current skinwalkers would be the ones to end her. The elders had said, since she was nowhere near their power, they would consider her weak. And to their understanding, the weak ones were picked off. My dad, Grandpa, and 3 of the other elders had decided to be the ones to lure my aunt off to the forbidden land. To this day, my dad still doesn't say much about the experience, but what he did say was enough to make this truly one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. My dad would only ever talk about her appearance. She was tall, skinny, and crawled on all 4 legs. Her eyes were soulless and her mouth as wide as her head. The only other thing my dad told us was that she could have killed them in an instant, but something tells them she wanted to test her power against the true skinwalkers. The only reason my dad is still here is because of her sick pride and his unbelievable luck. In the days that followed, the reservation slowly turned back to normal. The animals stopped disappearing, and the oppressive atmosphere was lifted. The memory of my Aunt Lita haunted me. I couldn't forget the look in her eyes, the way she had changed, and the image of her disgusting transformation out of my head. I moved off of the reservation after I turned 23. I moved for other reasons, but I would be lying if I said this whole thing didn't play a part in me wanting to pack up and leave that life behind. I had a falling out with my family when I left, and that's a story for another day. But I truly never believed that simply luring her away would ever work. And even though I don't talk to anyone on the reservation, I still worry for their safety. I really do hope she never comes back. I actually went camping on the edge of Skinwalker Ranch once, and it was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had. It was in 2019, in the summer right before the pandemic. I was dating this girl. For privacy's sake, we can call her Julia. We were both 19, and as fresh adults, our favorite thing to do together was explore abandoned buildings, mine shafts, tunnels, and anything that could get our thrill up. I guess this hobby stemmed from our love of horror movies, and after a while, we had just seen all of the good ones and thought, why not make our own experiences? I have tons of terrifying paranormal encounters, but this one was definitely real, whereas the others could hypothetically be explained by rationality. Julia and myself had heard about Skinwalker Ranch, and since we were only 5 hours away by car, we decided to plan a camping trip and see what all of the hype was about. We had been planning this camping trip for months. We had both read about the place's history online. I was always the rational one, and I simply enjoyed traveling and exploring since I was already into hiking and camping prior to our relationship. But Julia, on the other hand, was intrigued by the paranormal. It was her idea to camp so close to the ranch in hopes of catching a glimpse of something. We arrived at our campsite just before dusk. The sunset was beautiful. I truly thought this is actually a really nice campsite. As we set up our tent and gathered firewood, an uneasy silence settled over the area. Something felt off. I had done this exact thing 1,000 times, but somehow the sound of nature felt like it was missing. There was no presence of animals in the area. We hadn't seen a single deer or even heard the leaves rustling. Of course, as the rational one, I tried to brush off the creeping sense of dread, but even Julia pointed out how I'm usually the one who's calm. We laughed it off, but I seriously felt like something was wrong. We built a fire and cooked a simple dinner, our conversation light and filled with laughter. But as the night deepened, an oppressive darkness enveloped our campsite. The stars overhead glittered like cold, distant eyes. Julia glanced at the dark outline of the ranch in the distance. Maybe we should go explore a little, she suggested, her voice trembling with excitement and apprehension. I was hesitant, and every bone in my body told me to say no. But as a 19-year-old young man, I had to impress my woman. I decided to man up and go. We grabbed our flashlights, my rifle, and her bear spray, and began to make our way towards the border of the ranch. The air grew colder as we walked, and the silence was almost tangible, like a living entity pressing down on us. It wasn't long before we heard it, the distant sound of chanting, carried on the wind. We exchanged uneasy glances, but kept moving forward, drawn by our morbid curiosity. The chanting grew louder, more distinct. It was a rhythmic, fear-inducing sound that sent shivers down my spine. I told Julia we should leave, but she called me a wimp and said she would go on without me anyway. After stumbling around in the direction of the chanting, we found a large, dome-shaped structure made of some sort of clay, or maybe carved from rock. We saw a group of figures cloaked in dark robes heading into the structure, 2 of them carrying some sort of bag. I told Julia that we had definitely seen enough, and we had to get out of there now. Of course, this girl's curiosity was too much for her. One of the reasons we are no longer together. We got just barely close enough to see through the opening of the structure. A large bonfire blazed. The figures moved in a synchronized manner, their chants rising and falling. I felt the chill run down my spine as I realized we were witnessing some sort of ritual. I reached for Julia's hand and squeezed, urging her to stay hidden and silent. One of the figures stepped forward, raising their arms to the sky. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and the air around us seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. My heart pounded in my chest, a primal fear gripping me. I wanted to run, to drag Julia back to the safety of her campsite, but she was rooted to the spot, unable to tear her eyes away from the scene unfolding before us. Suddenly, the flames of the bonfire surged higher, casting an eerie glow over the structure. A low growling sound filled the air, sending a wave of terror through me. We watched in horror as a figure began to materialize within the flames. A grotesque, nightmarish creature with glowing eyes and elongated limbs. Its presence was overwhelming, a palpable force of malevolence that seemed to drain the very warmth from our bodies. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the figures fell silent, bowing their heads in reverence. The creature stepped out of the fire, its eyes scanning the structure with an almost sentient awareness. Out of the bag, two hooded figures dumped out a goat, in which the creature was consumed in 3 bites. This, finally, was enough for Julia to finally decide she was in danger, and she ran. The creature heard her stumble over rocks and let out a loud snarl, and within an instant it began to move towards us, its movements fluid and unnaturally fast. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my rifle and fired at the creature. Of course, it did nothing, but at this point the hooded figures became increasingly aware of our presence, and all we could do was run. We were a good 5 yards away, so we were able to make it to our campsite. We burst through our tent and closed the zipper. Julia started to cry. The keys to my truck were in one of our bags, so she silently searched for her backpack. Right as she found the keys, a tall, slender shadow began to circle around our tent. It was a 10-person tent with 4 entrances. We slowly shuffled around the tent, desperate to keep our space between us and this thing. When the creature was on the side furthest from us, we opened one of the doors and ran. We dashed towards the truck, the creature closing in on us. I fumbled with the keys, but finally managed to unlock the doors, and we threw ourselves inside, slamming the doors shut just as the creature reached the vehicle. Its snarling face pressed against the window, and I could see its glowing eyes up close. I started the engine and floored the gas pedal. The truck launched forward, tires spinning on loose gravel. The creature let out a frustrated howl as we sped away. I didn't dare look back, my focus solely on getting us as far from the ranch as possible. When I checked the rearview mirror, the beast had kept up with the truck, following first on all 4s, then on its 2 back legs. But eventually, it left us alone as I was able to speed up. We abandoned all our things, adrenaline coursing through our veins. We found a hotel, checked in, locking the door behind us and collapsing onto the bed. We had our first serious fight that night, and I broke up with her shortly after realizing she was causing a lot of trouble for me, as her curiosity had already gotten us in trouble before, causing me to get trespassing on my record. We still talk sometimes, but neither of us have brought up that experience again, both because of how terrifying it was, and because of the fight that we had in the hotel afterwards. My grandma was an old Native American woman. She lived to be 98, bless her sweet heart. She was full of many stories and great wisdom. One of my favorite stories is also her scariest. It's a story that her own grandpa told her when she was a little girl. In the late 1800s, he lived among my people, the Navajo, in a small village nestled in the shadow of a towering mesa. Her grandpa grew up alongside his best friend, Paloke, They were as close as brothers, sharing dreams of a future where their people could live in peace. Haloke was admired for his strength and bravery, but he was always naive and overconfident. He became a very prideful man. As they grew older, a darkness began to creep into Haloke's heart. He became obsessed with the old legends of the Skinwalkers, evil beings who could take on the form of animals and wield great power. The stories spoke of the Witchery Way, a forbidden path that required the most heinous of acts to gain such power. Most people simply dismissed these stories, as it was very rare for this community to desire to harm one another. But Haloke was captivated by the idea of becoming a skinwalker. The skinwalkers were a terrible, horrible creature, only born of hatred and pure evil. The mere mention of the demons in my grandpa's village was taboo. One night, Haloke confided in my grandpa his desire to initiate the Witchery Way. My grandpa was horrified and he tried to dissuade him, but his mind was made up. He believed that by becoming a skinwalker, he could protect our people from the encroaching settlers and ensure their survival. Despite my grandpa's pleas, Haloke set out to perform the first step of the ritual. He went away to a nearby burial ground where he unearthed the grave of a recently deceased woman. My grandpa followed him, hoping to stop him before it was too late. When he arrived, he found Haloke already deep in the throes of the ritual. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light as he committed the unspeakable act of necrophilia. My grandpa watched in horror, unable to comprehend the depths of his friend's corruption. He knew that if Haloke continued down this path, there would be no turning back. The next step of this ritual was even more horrifying. Haloke had planned to kill his own father, a respected elder of the tribe. He desired such strength that he was willing to kill his own father to get it. My grandpa knew that he had to act quickly to prevent this atrocity. He confronted Haloke, begging him to abandon the ritual and return to the light. Haloke, however, was beyond reason. He attacked my grandpa, his strength and speed already enhanced by the magic that he had invoked. My grandpa could not fight back, so he ran. He decided that the only way to save Haloke's father was to warn him. He ran to Haloke's hut and found his father, who he thought was resting. As my grandpa walked up to Haloke's father, it turned out it was already too late. Haloke had already killed his father. Haloke, now bursting into the hut and fully transformed into a demon, it was obvious that the ritual was complete. My grandpa cried out to his friend, but his friend didn't answer. The screech of a monster was the only response. He stared at my grandpa and stood there. As he moved towards him, he roared right into his face, but just then he turned around and left. My grandpa couldn't tell if he was actually in control of the power or if he simply spared him since he recognized him. Either way, my grandpa knew he had to warn the village. He raced back, his heart pounding with fear and determination. He gathered the elders and told them of Haloke's descent into darkness. The tribe was devastated by the news, but they knew they had to act quickly to protect themselves. The elders performed a powerful cleansing ritual, calling upon the spirits of our ancestors to banish the skinwalker from our land. My grandpa stood at the center of the circle. He led the ceremony since he was the closest to Haloke and had the strongest bond formed with him. By the strength of his people and the bond of his lost friendship, the ritual was complete. A blinding light flashed and enveloped the village, and Halokay's anguish echoed throughout the night. When the light faded, everyone was sure that the village was safe, but the cost had been great. They mourned the loss of a friend, knowing the darkness had claimed him forever. My grandpa vowed to honor Halokay's memory by living a life of courage and integrity, and by teaching the future generations the dangers of this ritual. Years passed and my grandpa became a respected elder of the tribe. He eventually told my grandma the story, who passed it on to new generations until she herself passed. My grandma had a lot of other scary stories and even a couple of alien encounters. I'll share them sometime soon. Well, that wraps up the terrifying legend of the Native American Skinwalker. We discussed the bone-chilling origin of these horrific creatures, and we also delved deep into various stories of encounters with these witch doctors turned demon. This legend serves as a terrifying reminder of the demonic rituals that have been performed on land that we now live on. Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, the stories people tell of these beings are enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. Remember, if you're ever in the West and find yourself driving through a desert at night, never stop and wait for any animals in the road to pass, especially if one of them just doesn't look normal. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to stay notified whenever we post, so that you never miss one of these chilling stories. Share your thoughts and any spooky encounters that you may have had with skinwalkers down in the comments below. And until next time,